The morning sky was pale above Rome, like a canvas waiting to be stained red. The streets pulsed with footsteps, murmurs, and the metallic jingle of coin purses clinking. They came early, thousands of them, from every corner of the empire. Farmers in rough tunics, senators in flowing togas, prostitutes with painted faces, the young, the old, even children. The purpose was singular, the craving was universal, the games. The gladiator games were more than blood sport. They were the very soul of Roman identity, both brutal and disciplined, glorious and grotesque. And today, the Colosseum, the empire's greatest monument to death, would welcome its largest crowd yet. Over 50,000 Roman citizens packed into its towering marble tiers, their voices a thundercloud over the eternal city. But to understand the games, one must go back, not just to the first clash of sword and shield, but to the heart of Rome's obsession with control, the origin, blood as ritual. The gladiator games did not start as entertainment. They began as funeral rites, solemn and sacred. In the earliest days of the Roman Republic, when a nobleman died, his family believed blood must accompany the soul into the afterlife. So slaves, usually captives from war, were forced to fight at his tomb. The belief, the spilling of blood, honored the dead. But Rome was never content to keep tradition still. The people gathered to watch. The rich saw opportunity. By the time of Julius Caesar, such funeral games were productions, and politicians used them to gain favor with the masses. Caesar himself once arranged the slaughter of 300 pairs of gladiators, 600 men, for his father's funeral, a funeral that became a campaign rally soaked in blood.
Please do well to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't, as an encouragement for more of this kind of content.
The fighters. Not all gladiators were unwilling. While many were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, others, called octorati, were free men who volunteered for the arena. Some were driven by debt, others by desperation, and a few by dreams of glory. The arena was brutal, but it offered something Rome rarely did, a path from nothing to legend. They trained in ludi gladiatori, gladiator schools run by harsh, sometimes ex-gladiator masters called lanistae. The most famous of these schools, Ludus Magnus, stood adjacent to the Colosseum, connected by a secret tunnel. Here men awoke before dawn. They trained for hours, learning to fight with precision and poise. Meals were rich in carbs, barley, beans, dried fruit, not to strengthen them, but to make their wounds easier to stitch. A man's value was not in his strength, but in his ability to make the crowd scream. The spectacle, a choreographed death. The games were carefully staged productions. The morning began with venatonis, animal hunts. Lions, panthers, elephants, and bears were dragged into the arena after journeys lasting months, even years. Hunters, some blindfolded, some armed with spears, danced around death as the crowd roared. Exotic beasts from the farthest corners of Rome's empire were paraded in like trophies and butchered like cattle. At midday came executions. These weren't swift. Criminals were crucified, burned alive, torn apart by animals. Sometimes myths were reenacted with real deaths, like the story of Prometheus, chained and devoured by eagles, staged with convicts. But it was the afternoon that brought the main event. Gladiators. The matchups were strategic. A retiarius with net and trident might face a heavily armored secutor who wore a helmet with a narrow slit to protect against nets. It was a dance of contrast, speed versus power, agility versus armor. Fighters wore elaborate crests, symbols of mythic animals and gods. The crowd even knew their gnomes, cheered their favorites like modern celebrities. Merchants sold figurines, wine cups, and oil lamps with their faces. But the fighting, though stylized, was real. Blood spattered the sand. Bones broke. Muscles tore. Fighters fought until one was disarmed, dying, or dead. And then all eyes turned upward to the editor, the sponsor of the games, often a politician or the emperor himself. The crowd would chant, "Mite, let him go. Jugula, kill him," and the editor would raise his hand. A turn of the thumb sealed a man's fate. In truth, the thumbs-up-down idea is a myth. It was more likely a gesture of sword or mercy. But either way, the crowd decided. Rome loved a killer, but pitied the defeated only when they had fought well. The glory, fame among chains. Few survived long. The average gladiator lived only 3 to 5 years after entering the arena. But those who did survive, those who killed with flair, with drama, with calculated cruelty, became gods among men. Men like Spartacus, the Thracian warrior who led the greatest slave rebellion in Roman history. Before he became a rebel, he was a gladiator who thrilled Roman crowds. Flama, a Syrian-born fighter who was offered his freedom 4 times, and he refused. He reportedly said, "The arena is my home." Commodus, the mad emperor who believed himself Hercules reborn and fought in the arena, slaying hundreds of opponents, although they were often wounded or unarmed. These men inspired mosaics, statues, poems, even graffiti scribbled on tavern walls. Salatus the Thracian makes the girls sigh, one read. The politics, bread and circuses. The games were never just sport, they were politics in action. Roman emperors used the games to distract the people. Give them bread and circuses, said the poet Juvenal, and they'll never revolt. While the Senate argued and empires waged war, the people were busy watching men die for entertainment. The games also served to remind the masses of Rome's power. Every time a gladiator fell, it was proof Rome conquers, Rome rules. Rome decides who lives and dies. It was a lie, of course. Behind the scenes, Rome was often rotting, corrupt, unstable, and bloated. But the games masked the decay. As long as the Colosseum thundered, the empire felt immortal. But even empires bleed. By the 4th century AD, a new force had begun to rise: Christianity. To Christians, the games were an abomination, ritualized murder that mocked the sanctity of life. Slowly, public opinion began to shift. Emperors became less enthusiastic, funds dried up, gladiator schools closed. But the final blow came in 404 AD. A Christian monk named Telemachus leapt into the arena during a match, shouting for it to stop. The crowd stoned him to death. But Emperor Honorius, shamed by the act, officially banned the gladiator games soon after. The Colosseum would never again roar for blood. Now, only the ruins remain. Vines creep through broken arches, the once blood-stained sand lies silent. But the echo lingers. You can still almost hear the roar, the clash, the cry for mercy, the silence before the sword falls. Because Rome did not build its glory on virtue. It built it on violence turned into art. And nowhere was that art more perfected than the arena, where men lived like slaves, died like heroes, and were worshipped like gods.